night with Byline Times. I'm Peter Jukes.
And I'm Hardeep Matharu. And over the next hour, we bring you what the papers don't say.
And what the TV doesn't tell you. Well, coming up, we'll be talking to Maya Bridges, who had a viral TikTok video about Boris Johnson's lies. And we'll be following up that up with the veteran correspondent Peter Oborne, famous now as our Byline Times diarist, who has delved deep into Johnson's misstatements before Parliament.
Plus, we'll be looking at the so-called Pingdemic and what the real reason is behind why we have empty supermarket shelves. And then we'll be joined on the blue sofa with the acclaimed playwright and writer, commentator Bonnie Greer, who'll be dissecting Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, and the rise of lies.
But of course, we, unlike other TV stations, are not funded by hedge funds from Dubai, nor by Murdoch's billions. We are funded by you. And we only keep going because of your subscriptions and your support. And you can do that in two simple ways. You can go to Patreon /Byline TV and support us there. But you can become a member. There's also some membership levels. And if you do, you can join us for our After Dark discussions tonight with Bonnie Greer. You can ask us whatever you like. You can also sign up on YouTube and become a super member there. But first, Boris Johnson and lying. Now, earlier this week, Maya Bridges, a 19-year-old based in Stirling in Scotland, uploaded her very acute analysis of how truth hasn't got its boots on, while a lie is halfway across the world. Let's look at her TikTok video before talking to Maya.
They're not dumb at all. They're incredibly intelligent. For example, if we look at, in the UK, Boris Johnson, he does this thing where he lies. He lies and he lies and he lies. And he's made a persona of, oh, I'm a buffoon, oh, ha, ha, our mate Boris down the pub. See, Boris, we didn't call him Mr. Johnson or the Prime Minister. No, Boris, he's our mate Boris. But he's not. He's incredibly intelligent. What he does is he lies and he lies and he lies and he lies. And it doesn't matter how big the lie is. He just keeps lying. The more you lie, if he says 5 lies a minute and it takes me 2 hours to disprove every lie and create the content to say, hey, this isn't true, which would take longer than 2 hours, but whatever, then what am I going to do? Because he said, what, like hundreds of lies by then? And it creates apathy. It's exhausting having to do it. If he's just going to keep lying, what's the point? Did fact checkers stop Trump from lying? No. Not at all. Because it's the age-old, we were always at war with Oceania. We weren't. But we were always at war with Oceania. The point of modern propaganda isn't only to misinform and push an agenda, it's also to exhaust your critical thinking skills and completely annihilate the concept of truth. That quote is incredibly underused, and it's very true. Truth doesn't exist. I mean, it does, but it doesn't, right? What's the truth with Boris Johnson? Okay? 350 million a week, it's true, but it's not true. It's in this limbo of everything is true, but nothing is true, and nothing he says is going to be true for an extended period of time, because the truth is completely malleable to these people. Because the way that these politicians operate is with...
Maya, good evening. Thank you for joining us. So why do you think that video that you made went so viral?
I don't know. I think it was because it's a very new phenomenon, that method of propaganda dissemination. I think the first paper on it came out in about 2013. So a lot of people haven't heard about it, but we know that the current way that we're dealing with Boris Johnson and all his lies and the lies of the Conservatives isn't working. It's obvious it's not working. We have seen the amount of lies that they say. We know they're lying, and they're still in power, and nothing's happened. And I think it's just because it's an answer that people haven't heard to a very kind of relevant question.
And why do you think, I mean, you explore this a bit in your video, but take us through the thinking behind putting it together. I mean, why are Johnson's lies so hard to counter in real time?
They're so hard because first of all, there's so many of them, and it is quite hard to fact check things. I mean, it's not too hard, but it's just so labor intensive. You know, it's so easy for me to tell a lie, for me to make up anything in the world, and then it's so much harder to actually take the time to get through lies and fact check them. And it's hard to know which lies to fact check and which lies not to fact check with Boris Johnson, because there's just so many of them.
It's funny you should say that, Maya. I don't know if you heard Dominic Cummings being interviewed by Laura Kunsberg on BBC this week, and he was talking about the £350 million bus lie. You know, we'll spend it not on the EU but on the NHS. And he said everybody spent all their time chasing down, proving it wasn't a lie, that it distracted them. Do you think that's another example of exactly what you're talking about?
Yeah, it is one of the examples, and it's another thing. It was such a big fish. It was such a big, juicy fish, and it was painful to watch because it was so obvious that is what they wanted us. That is what Boris Johnson wanted us to go after, because he quite literally painted it on a bus and paraded it around Britain.
So my question would be to you, what is the solution then? I mean, we're journalists, so we try to rebut this lie. We're going to speak very shortly to Peter Oborne, who's has a website, an exhaustive website he's building, listing all these lies. If you think that is time-consuming, exhausting, what is the solution to this sort of, some people call it hyper-normalization, but anyway, this sort of tsunami of lies we're faced with?
Right, so yeah, there's a few solutions. One of them is, we do still need to fact check things. Fact checking isn't quite as helpful with the type of dissemination, the method of dissemination that Boris uses. It's not quite as helpful as it is with other ones, because there's just so many lies to get through, and it's boring, quite frankly. But we do need to fact check some, but it's about picking and choosing. Another thing we can do is have warnings, because they don't actually care about facts, you can get information out so quickly. How fast could you write an article if you didn't have to fact check a single thing? If it didn't actually matter what was true and what wasn't? So fast. But for me to then do, even if we started at the same time, if I did one that was fully fact checked and with all my references and all my sources, it would take way longer. And by the time that I've done mine and I've sent it out, even if I have experts backing it, people have already seen the initial lie. And when you see something, even if you know it's a lie, it sits in your brain. It's still in there, and it's easy to forget what is and isn't a lie. So if we have little warnings, I think Twitter has warnings if this might be possible misinformation. Those are incredibly helpful. The number one, the best thing we can do, the most effective thing, is for people to know about it, for people to know about the method that they're using and understand it.
So in a way, your solution is your video, you know, to understand the strategy.
Yeah, that's exactly why I made it, because I don't know why, but I find this so interesting. This method of kind of dissemination of like propaganda. And I've been ruminating on it, and I got sick of it, and I had to do something.
Well, it's very insidious, isn't it? And I've often sort of pointed out that there's a lot in the British political system which is insidious, and that's why it's actually so dangerous, because we have this perception that everything is normal and we're governed by people who sound like they know what they're doing. But as we've seen during the coronavirus, there's so much under the surface that's going wrong. But Maya, in terms of people your age, I mean, I'm generalizing somewhat because I'm sure you can't speak for everyone in your generation, but could you give us an insight into what they make of the Johnson government, and also not just the lies, but the media's reaction and the role of journalism when it comes to his government?
I think that my generation and the kind of younger generations are definitely getting apathetic towards almost all sources of journalism, even a lot of sources that are kind of like more factual and like more on the left have fallen into the trap of playing into Boris's lies and playing Boris's game. I think that also apathy towards politics as well in general. Just, I can't fix it. It's too much for me to do. I don't think voting does anything. And then it's just so tiring and exhausting. But I think that's quite similar. I think that carries across generations as well. But I know that there is a lot of opposition for Boris in my generation and younger generations, and you can definitely see that on the apps that cater towards younger generations. Like the kind of anti-Boris political scene on TikTok is absolutely massive.
Yeah, well, we'll have to check that out because I haven't seen it. But Maya, thanks so much for joining us. Keep up the good work. We need as many people as possible exposing Johnson's lies. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Now, in a moment, we'll be joined by Peter Oborne, but let's see what else happened this week after Maya's video, when Dawn Butler MP, who often appears on Byline TV, stood up on the last day of Parliament before recess and made an extraordinary, or maybe not extraordinary, series of statements to the House of Commons. Let's see what happened next.
So I got thrown out of the chamber and out of Parliament today. I had to leave the premises because I called Boris Johnson a liar on the floor of the House.
Madam Deputy Speaker, poor people in our country have paid with their lives because the Prime Minister spent the last 18 months misleading this House and the country.
The thing is, Boris Johnson is a serial liar. That's been proven time and time again. He said, for instance, that the economy has improved 73% since the Tories have taken over. That's a lie. It's 20%. Boris Johnson said that we have severed the link between infection, hospital rates and death. That is a lie. But not only did he lie, he said the scientists said this. And so the scientists had to correct Boris Johnson and said that the link has been weakened. Weakened is very different from being severed. I think in ordinary times, you have governments that are in the main honest and they are principled. What we have seen over the last 18 months is a government that is truly corrupt to the core. They will do whatever they want and whatever they like in order to get their hands on public money and to give that public money to their mates. And we've seen an erosion of parliamentary democracy. Let's not forget that this government under Boris Johnson went to court to try and close down Parliament, and it got overturned because they didn't want us to have any say in anything that they've done. Under the Coronavirus Act 2020, it gave unprecedented powers to this government, Henry VIII powers, that said that they can do whatever they want, when they want, and we are not allowed to question them. That is wrong, and really people should be worried about that. Time and time again, we've got government ministers that have been literally caught with their pants down and nothing has been done about it. So as a backbencher, if I can't call it out and say it as it is, who's going to do it? And I just felt it was important today.
Now we're joined by veteran correspondent, foreign correspondent, journalist and commentator Peter Oborne, who's worked in many aspects of Fleet Street and now has a perch on Byline Times with his fantastic diary. Thanks for joining us, Peter. Now, you've been tracking these lies. Did you think it was an extraordinary moment that Dawn Butler basically enunciated them in Parliament? And is this a kind of turning of the tide, do you think?
I think it's a lovely moment because there's been this orthodoxy, which is based on parliamentary procedure, that you can't call another MP a liar. And if you do, you're breaking the rules of the House of Commons. And that's going back more than 100 years. And it's based on civility in the House and a sense of, people are gentlemen or gentlewomen, as it were. On this occasion, that's worked with every previous Prime Minister, but suddenly with Boris Johnson, who's made numerous, scores of false statements in the House of Commons, it doesn't work because he's at liberty to lie, to cheat, to issue falsehoods And if somebody says, hang on, you're lying, it's them, the person who says they're lying, who has to get thrown out. So what Dawn Butler did was to challenge that system by calling Mr. Johnson a liar, and she got thrown out. And so the liar stayed in place, and the person who called out the liar and said what they were doing had to be thrown out. And I think that's a very profound and symbolic moment.
Well, Hardeep, you've mentioned this, haven't you, about these just wrote about it today.
Good chats, yes. I mean, to what extent? I mean, I agree, Peter, that it's sort of a very symbolic moment. Could it be a moment that has sort of really exposed some of the constitutional weaknesses in our entire political system? That essentially, you know, when bad actors as opposed to good chaps get into power who have no intention of playing by the rules, the system is just not fit for purpose. And if that's the case, what do we do about that?
It's important. It's not simply the lies which Mr. Johnson repeatedly tells on the floor of the House of Commons. It's his abuse of power. And so he consistently breaches the ministerial code, for instance, by taking money from donors and not declaring it properly, or taking money, or the way he behaved when he left the Foreign Office and just squatted in his official residence despite repeated letters from the permanent secretary. It goes on all the time, and it's not just him, it's Priti Patel. Do things which traditionally, or in all previous governments, would have led to resignation, but they just carry on in defiance of all propriety and all decency, and the system simply can't cope. Because as you just said there, Hardeep, people who behave very badly and without conscience or morality, the British system hasn't been designed to deal with such people, and that is who Mr. Johnson and his fellow cabinet ministers, it's not just him, that's who they are. So,
which brings the question, at least to me, Peter, and we talked about this before, about how Johnson and his ministers get away with it in that other safeguard in our system, which is the Fourth Estate. I mean, I don't know if you noticed today, Emily Maitlis gave an interview to, I think, Press Gazette about how it is awful that Number 10 had tried to intervene in her statement about Dominic Cummings last year, and was immediately reprimanded again. So you had Dawn Butler on one hand, thrown out of Parliament for pointing out that Boris Johnson lies, Emily Maitlis chastised for pointing out the BBC was sat upon. Do you think, my first part of that question would be, and I think you have said this, but do you think the media is the major enabler of this breaking of rules? Because in a way, the same problem, lack of conscience, lack of probity and morality, is pernicious there as well.
Yes, that is another, absolutely. This is another reason why Mr. Johnson can get away with it, because essentially the media supposed to act as sort of holding politicians accountable if they tell lies, to call them up, if they corrupt, to bring them to account. But that doesn't work at the moment, because the media are part of the government machine.
Wasn't there some line
Well, this week, the other thing that's happened, which I find extraordinary, because it's sort of almost completely been buried by the mainstream media, no matter how compromised he is, Dominic Cummings was interviewed by the BBC's political editor, Lauren Koonsberg, and he told her that Boris Johnson referred to the Telegraph newspaper as his real boss. And yet, many people said that this is 5 years too late, you know, asking Cummings about the 350 million red bus and everyone from Turkey is coming here. This was too little too late, really, which seems to be a real problem.
Well, funnily enough, I can imagine Johnson saying that without meaning it. You know, he either said to Johnson that quite a lot of these comments are just throwaway remarks, which may not be in a private context to his most trusted advisor. I'm not completely overwhelmed by the quality of Dominic Cummings' evidence. I don't think that Johnson necessarily meant that he was being controlled in some nefarious way by the Telegraph. I think it's more complicated than that.
But talking about nefarious control, and I was a bit disappointed Lord Cuthbert did not pursue this. He said that there was a group of people who decided to install Boris Johnson as Prime Minister and might decide to uninstall him. Was I alone? I don't think I was in finding that a little bit disturbing, or am I being naive? Like there was always the men in white coats, there was always the grandees who kind of said, well, it's time to go now, David or Boris or whatever. Or do you think there is this vote leave cabal? I assume he's talking of people like Matthew Elliott or perhaps Daniel Hannan, who are friends of Dominic Cummings, who think they run things in a way can dupe the electorate.
Yeah, I don't always defend Johnson, but I have to say that the Prime Minister just won an 80-seat majority in an overwhelming election victory, and within a matter of days, I think, according to Cummings' account, he was plotting to get rid of the Prime Minister. Is completely unrealistic. I mean, that isn't what happens. B, who on earth does Mr. Dominic Cummings think he is to be able to sort of install or to remove a Prime Minister with his cabal of fellow plotters? So I didn't think although I felt that there was some interesting stuff in the Cummings interview, I think Cummings himself is a very low-grade individual, and those remarks just simply showed how out of touch he was with reality. But
on one good note, or useful note for a journalist, he does provide some, especially around the coronavirus, some disclosure, some more information about what was actually going on in government at that time. That was useful, wasn't it?
Yes, but I mean, what the big question around Cummings, of course, is that he was the closest counsellor to the Prime Minister for about a year after he became Prime Minister, perhaps more than a year. And the shocking lack of judgment and the immensely low calibre of the people currently governing the country is what is terrifying. I mean, there's no other word for it. Terrifying.
But what can be done about it, Peter? Do you have any insights into what we do about a failing political system with very weak foundations and mendacious ministers who don't want to play by the rules anymore? What do we do about that?
Well, eventually I think we've got to try and put it right. And that's why I'm very proud to be associated with Byline Times and other organisations. Open Democracy is another one, which tries to tell the truth about what is happening. The tragedy is that Parliament appears to be powerless, and I have quite a few friends among Conservative MPs, and how they can continue to support this amoral and increasingly what looks to me corrupt government, which is destroying decency and managing COVID and all sorts of other things, Brexit, with total incompetence, with terrible effect on people's lives. Now, why? There's going to be a day of reckoning. None of us know exactly when it's going to be. In the meantime, the best we can do is to tell the truth about what is going on and to expose it as best we can, whether it's the lies, the dodgy contracts, the lack of due process. That is what we can do.
Well, if I had a drink in my hand, I'd say I'd drink to that, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
A huge pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. The Pingdemic, which has emerged in the past week as a so-called cause of empty supermarket shelves. But is that the real story? Well, Caolan Robertson, our Byline TV producer, spent the last few months travelling 1,500 miles across the country, talking to people in the fishing industry, farming, road haulage, and this week he was investigating the impact of consumers on Brexit. He's got some evidence which counters the claims about the Pingdemic and self-isolation of workers leading to these empty shelves. Let's take a look at one of his films with a club owner in Manchester, and then we'll be joined by Bonnie Greer on the sofa to get on to the culture wars.
How did you vote in the 2016 election? Brexit. You know, if I go back again now and it was me as a person, I would say no. I would say remain in Europe. And now it's hitting my business.
You're terrible, aren't you? See you in a minute. Girls, join the membership scheme.
We can't get the staff. We can't get minimum wage staff. We just can't. You know, we've just noticed it this year. Certainly around hospitality, we had a meeting, a discussion about it, and literally there is no enough staff to run. People that were Europeans that could travel freely across Europe now can't come into Britain. And that is a large chunk of hospitality that's now missing. And there aren't people there to fill those vacancies. You know, a chef that you could have been employing at £10, £15 an hour is now demanding £30, £35 an hour because there's that much shortage and he can pick and choose his job. That's what we're up against at the moment. But because of that cost, then drinks will have to go up, menus will have to go up, prices will have to go up all round. So it will impact on the individual that's actually attending a bar, a restaurant, a theatre, whatever. I think it's all going to have that knock-on effect. September the 23rd will be 8 years of owning this bar. We took it as a gamble. First couple of years, it was poverty, and then finally we turned it around and made it work. So.
See the black serviettes there? Just give me a serviette out of that.
Literally is that bad. You go into a supermarket and the shelves are empty. You think it's not true, but it's true. Asda, Tesco's, they're all only half filling the shelves because they cannot get the goods in. There's a shortage of beer, of certain products of beer. There's the lorries can only come in at certain times, and sometimes they don't even come. I've got 5 pumps. One of those beers, 5 pumps. One of those beers I can't stock because there isn't any there. You know, they haven't got the stock to transport. You know, they could be sitting in the factory where they've made it, but they haven't got the transport to transport the beer to another part to bottle it to give it to me. Or, you know, that's what's going on, the chain supplies, and it's just knocking on and knocking on. You know, there is huge amounts within our industry that's missing. It's an absolute cock-up. How did you vote in the 2016 election?
How did I vote? I voted as a businessman, and I voted Brexit. You know, if I go back again now and it was me as a person, I would say no. I would say remain in Europe, because what I've lost as a person, I think means more than my business, if that makes sense. Is that the freedom of movement means so much to me. And I think out of everything of Europe, that's the one thing that I regret that we've lost, you know, and now it's hitting my business.
In these dark times that we find ourselves in, it's all too easy to feel passive and disengaged and hopeless. But there is something you can do. If you like the sound of a fearless, independent media outlet really trying to shine a light where the mainstream doesn't, then do sign up to Byline TV. You can hit the join button on YouTube or subscribe on Patreon. You can be part of driving meaningful change.
Thought, who better to talk to than somebody who not only a noted playwright, commentator, somebody gives us a bit of outside perspective. Brought up in America, has lived in UK for how long, Bonnie?
3
now?
decades.
3 decades, but she can see it all. She has seen it. So great to have you finally here, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Joining us
Great
on
to
the
be
blue
here.
sofa.
Great to be here,
Fantastic.
and lovely colors.
It is a lovely sofa.
great,
Perfect
yeah.
for you. Lovely copy of Byline Times.
It is, here it is. I shouldn't do that with my paper. But anyway, here you are.
It's
very
lovely.
good, yes.
So why I wanted to start with you, Bonnie, because you've been watching. We haven't really spoken for the last 2 years. Certainly, well, with us here since the election of Joe Biden. And one of the things I noticed in the 90s was, that Britain. They always say, America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold.
That's right.
And I noticed with Clinton's election in '92. It took 5 years because of our electoral cycle. We got Blairism, we got the third
Exactly.
way. Are there any lessons from what you're seeing in America which kind of predict what's going to happen here? There's obvious analogies between Trump and Johnson, but Trump seems to have gone, or has he gone? What do you think's happening?
Well, I think first of all, we have to realize that Trump is a symptom. He's not the cause of anything. So whatever happens, what Trump has stirred up will always be there. It's American. It is what America is. America is built like that. So once in a while you get an autocrat who comes in, who can take advantage of it. He never gets to be president of the United States, but this time it happened. So Trump, and I lived in New York during the time Trump was there. He's basically a lazy guy. So I don't see him, his ego and his insanity could drive him to try and run in 2024, but he's also lazy. So we'll see if he'll be able to do it. I'm putting my money on people who will try to do it, like Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida. He'll try, but Trump has pretty much remade the Republican Party, which has been going down that road since the 50s. It didn't happen overnight. It's been 50 years in the making. And Donald Trump, who frankly, I was shocked that he was running as a Republican because Donald Trump is a Democrat. But it was a business opportunity for him, and he took advantage of it. We, I think, here in the United Kingdom have been slowed down in terms of copying directly. I think we've been slowed down a bit by Brexit. Brexit is a huge shock. And I think it's going to take people a long time to understand what actually has happened. So that's kind of slowed us down a bit in terms of copying the United States, because there is no equivalent to that happening in the United States. So Britain, in a sense, is on its own.
So would you say that the Trump election and administration and Brexit, they're fundamentally different in their nature? And if so, what do you think is the difference, Bonnie?
Well, that's an interesting question. Brexit is part of a kind of fabric of being, frankly, English. It's English nationalism by another thing. Dan Hannan is one of the exemplars of, I love Otto English, calls him blueberry, what he calls him, the bluebird national, Englishness. Ladybird Englishness, which I love.
Patriotism.
Well, it is. And so Hannan represents that kind of thing. Farage represents the other so-called working class, even though he's not, kind of thing. And so that's a huge performance. That's part of English life for probably since Henry VIII. So now this is another one of its manifestations
of England drawing up the drawbridge,
yes,
the Reformation.
And the whole idea of I call it his finest hour mentality, which is usually pushed by guys I call them World War II vets born in 1958 and 1968, who push this kind of idea of England as the United Kingdom. And most people in the world, when they think of the United Kingdom, they think of England, they think of England, they think of the home counties, and they think of the home counties. So that's really what it is. So that's a separate drama. America is going through a second birth or death. And this is a death, this is a near-death experience, Donald Trump. We'll see what happens next year. But
with the midterms.
Yes. This is the same thing. This is pretty much, I think we're pretty much where America was in the 1850s in terms of people asking what is the United States, what generally is. And we have to remember, as you both know, the United States is a confederation of states that have decided to have a central government and has built a constitution to define what that is, but the states are sovereign. So we have different vaccine mandates, we have different, each state has its own election.
Voting systems.
Exactly.
I remember when Barack Obama in a speech referred to them as these United States.
And that is what it is.
As opposed to the United States.
It is that. It is these United States who we've always been trying to be the United States. And this has been happening for hundreds of years. So it's a young country as well. But Trump was a near-death experience. And I think we'll get through it. But it's still, the jury is still out. It's that bad.
So would you say that America is a country that is very aware of its identity issues, if you like, whereas in Britain, it's almost the opposite. We're trying to always cover up having a discussion about its real identity. I mean, is that one of the differences?
Well, in America, you define your Americanness, it's a personal thing. So America is built to incorporate individuals. And every American has a movie about America in their head. So every American will tell you what America is. I'll tell you what it is. Trump will tell you. And they're all valid-ish representations. Whereas here, this country was kind of sewn together. It still has an hereditary monarch, which I don't quite understand what that's all about. But I think, but I think it's partly people being assured, and I think it's very much a British character, that there's something, it's all going to be all right. I think there's a deep fear of democracy in this country.
Yeah.
I mean, a deep fear. People don't want to face it. I get things online where people saying, oh, well, that's fine, but how do we trust who the next person will be? And you think, but this is democracy.
Well, what do they not want to face?
They want assurance. And it's very, to be British is to be assured. You have to be assured that there's somebody in the back who's running the strings or running the boat. That's pretty much in the British character. So mavericks don't really come out of here. They perform maverickness, but not really.
So I suppose the backstop in a lot of the sort of, I'd say, servitude of the English mind. Scottish people.
That's harsh. I mean, I wouldn't say that.
The backstop of servitude is they're serving the Queen, who seems this nice woman who's been around for so long.
Well, I think they're serving, Peter, I would say, they're serving the stability of the royal family.
Yes. Can I go back to instability just a little bit? Because you made that very observant point that what's been happening, the Republican Party has been happening for 50 years, which I suppose takes us back to civil rights and the Southern strategy. And I just wonder if there's an analogy here, because obviously in the 60s, particularly in 68, the Republicans basically went for the Southern white vote, which had been the Democrat vote. Is there not a similar thing happening here? Well, I call it the Northern strategy. In the same, in 68, Enoch Powell tried to create this sort of ethno-nationalist idea of Britishness. And he was rejected by the Conservative Party. And people have argued, particularly Peter Oborne, who you've just had on, that in a way this is the triumph of Powellism. Is there not a comparison there then, that the fear of the other, the fear of losing white supremacy is occupying both countries?
Well, I think here, I've been a Labour voter since I was became a citizen. And I always will vote for that party because I think it's the coalition of the Labour Party that interests me, coalition of the left. However, I think what's happened is that the Labour Party has aged, its leadership has aged, whereas it's sort of, things are churning within it are young. So it's sort of like the Democratic Party to a certain extent. The Democratic Party leadership is, my generation and older. And they've been around, they've been in the 60s, 70s, 80s, they've seen it all. They're still vital, they're still running things, but they don't actually, I guess, are not in touch with what the next generation wants. And that next generation is as big as my generation, the boomers. So they will take over. However, the Labour Party, it seems to me, looking at it from the outside, is really, it has very deep ideological battles going on. Whereas the Conservative Party, the only thing the Conservative Party is interested in is the United Kingdom, is the union, is the idea of the union. Anybody can be in the union, and that's where they're sort of focused on. And the union is out there, so that the union actually, what's represented to the world is the union, led by England, of course, always led by England, but the union of the nations of these islands is what Churchill also posited, because Churchill had to talk the American people into coming into World War II. I mean, Hitler helped by stupidly, he declared war, which was the dumbest thing he could have done next to invading Russia. But Churchill had to constantly talk the American people into this idea of England, 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 because that's all we could grasp is England. Americans don't really have an idea of anything else.
It's interesting what you say, Bonnie, because in many ways, and other people have said this, Fintan O'Toole, that the United Kingdom is a mini imperial state. Absolutely. And my thesis is that Boris Johnson is the neo-imperial prime minister.
Absolutely.
Which is a strand perhaps we're not finding on the more left-wing parties, the Conservatives. It's not just this drive towards culture wars and race baiting. It's also something quite imperial, which is probably linked to the former, perhaps.
Well, it's colonialism, and I listen to people arguing about colonialism, and they're talking about all the different countries, but actually, colonialism is about being in the world, and you can see France and Germany and England, Britain fighting over who were the best colonials. But actually, colonialism is about being in the world, how you position yourself in the world, and all those other people out there, they're kind of in it, but actually, it's about us. This country is at the point now where, and I always tell people this, and they get angry with me. I said, there's never been a revolution in this country. Never. And in fact, when there was a chance to be one, this country invited a king to come over and invade to get rid of another king. I mean, it didn't come from, yes, I mean, this country likes kings. And I mean, the minute that people can accept that, then they can move on, but they don't want to face it. This country is always like royalty, always.
So two big issues on the culture wars, particularly this week on Byline Times, but the last 2 or 3 weeks across the whole press, was the England football team and the role of those 3 lions, those key players with black, mixed and ethnic backgrounds, who were so mercilessly attacked, but then so supported.
Absolutely.
I mean, did you see that? And the other one I was going to mention, by the way, because we're talking about royalty, but maybe get to that later. The other big article this week on our site was Meghan Markle, and the royal family and racism, and did you sense? We felt, because we've been writing about this culture wars for a long time, particularly Hardeep, with her background and writing about Brexit and the imperial overtones of Brexit and why people from former colonies voted for Brexit. Do you think it was a turnaround of the culture wars? Was that an optimistic moment for you the last 2 weeks, or do you see us heading down to more battles and more darkness?
Well, you know yourself as a writer of drama that this is a very theatrical country. In fact, this country makes the best theater on earth because everyone is in performance. And I think in a way, and I've talked to people like myself who were born outside of this country, and I think this is what happened to Meghan. You think at one point, when's the lights going to come up, and when's the curtain coming down, and when's the real thing going to happen? It never does. So, once you understand that about this country, particularly about England, then you're on your way to understanding things. I think for Meghan, I'm sure she thought at one point, so when's everybody going to get real here? They are real. This is real. This is a real thing. As far as, and that goes back to the England football team. The England football team is a kind of a mythology that plays into the theater of Britain. I mean, the first map of Great Britain was called actually the Theater of Britain. So the English football team plays into that mythos. Now, every black person I know before this game happened told me if they lose, these guys are going to get racially abused. Everybody knew this was going to happen. Because what happened was the mythos was broken. There were hashtags like Bring It Home, And there were hashtags called Bring It to Rome. And so there's always underneath it this kind of belief that we're actually not going to make it. It's not really going to happen. And then on top of it is this theater of Great Britain, which is the theater of England. And on one hand, it works wonderfully because I have friends who work for the EU. And the British would come into meetings and everything would be sorted. Everyone, just really this whole kind of calm, this togetherness, this focus, bringing in the diversity issues, and Britain is really missed in the EU for that. That's the good side of the theater. The bad side of the theater is the performance that the English football team know they have to perform, and these are young. I was outraged. These are young guys. This could be damaging to them. When you're an older person, it's like, okay, people didn't like me. When you're a 19-year-old and you are on that stage, and it's like being on a stage and you forget your lines, and you're doing a solo, and they've got to play the music so you can get off. That was a moment that could damage you. But like you say, people came back, and they came back in a tender way. It was very tender. And I loved the messages, and I loved all that. And I did a lot of American TV around this, and I said, you really have to look at underneath the British sort of thing and see the British people are fundamentally something that the American people fundamentally are. British people are decent and fundamentally decent. Americans aren't fundamentally decent. We're nice people, good people, strong people, brave people. Decency means seeing somebody in trouble and they move to help, no matter if you are a stranger or what. A British person will do that automatically, in my experience. An American will not.
Why? Because of fear?
I think it's just, that's a good question. I think it's, Americans are very afraid of weakness and, frailty and inability to do something. It's a thing that happens. Americans are very kind, but they aren't decent, whereas the British are decent. And I think that's the thing that's going to get the country through.
Well, the funny thing is, isn't it? A bit like Dunkirk, the failure to win, we were in the final, when the final came a kind of weird, always coming together, that weakness is celebrated. Maybe this is all part of the theatre, by the way.
Well, it is the theatre of Britain. Churchill had to make, this was a retreat.
Yeah.
And actually, they never teach this, Hitler held off the planes for the most part because he thought he had elements in this country who were telling him they're gonna come over on your side. We're all Saxons. We're the Anglo-Saxons, you're the Saxons, so it's all gonna happen. And Hitler was, because he was a megalomaniac and insane, was counting on that. So he thought, right, I won't hit them, I'll let them go across the channel and they'll see how nice I am. Churchill smelled that in a minute and then turn that around. So he was a miracle in terms of war for this country because he was the right person at the right time.
And Bonnie, just lastly, it's really positive and extraordinary to hear you talk about that innate decency. You still feel that, regardless of everything the country's gone through?
Oh yeah, this is a decent country. And
what is it that you hang on to then, with all of what we're seeing now and Brexit,
decency.
Johnson?
People are decent. And it's too bad that we don't have a decent leader. It's too bad that, I think Gordon Brown was a decent leader. I don't think he was a great prime minister. He was a decent man. If we had leaders who could display decency, I think it would come out. And I think you would see that trait come to the fore. Boris is not a decent person. He's never exhibited that trait ever. He's never. It's not a surprise or shock.
And
but
just
point out decency. There is a model now. Unfortunately, it's a football manager, which is Gareth Southgate.
Gareth Southgate
is more popular than Churchill.
Well, Gareth Southgate wrote "Dear England," which should be read to every school child. Every child in this country should read Dear England. It's a masterpiece of decency. It's simply decent. And that's why he's a great man.
And just very last question. What do you think explains that gap, Bonnie? If the English people or the British people are fundamentally decent, why have we diverged so much when it comes to this particular leader, this particular government at the moment?
Because this country is a theater. And you see, Boris performs a trope. And it's a cross between Billy Bunter, Churchillian. Most of us, well, we weren't around when Churchill was or in his grave, so we don't know. He performs that, and the country's still in love with toffs, and won't admit that. But a working class guy couldn't look like Boris. He couldn't physically look like Boris. He couldn't look scruffy. He couldn't look like he has no bath. He couldn't look like he combs his hair. No working class person could get away with that. But a toff can, and we think, oh, that's really, really, we like that. And it's the toff noblesse oblige that is still very much a part of this culture. And it's going to destroy it if people don't face it. They got to face this.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. We've got to face it. And one of the ways we try to face it is with our front page. I don't know if we can see it, but it is Hardeep's title tonight. It's Lie of the Land, which you can see a little bit of English punning going on there, Hardeep.
Well, we try our best.
We try our best. The lead story is actually of this plant, not the Pingdemic, that Brexit is causing these supply problems, written by our producer Caolan Robertson. And then you wrote the second story, didn't you?
Yes, about the good chaps walked out of the room a long time ago. Britain wake up, essentially about Dawn Butler.
What's that great line you told me? Somebody told me it's like an honour system where people don't have any honour.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the third story is...
And the third story is a special investigation by Sam Bright, our chief political and investigations reporter. It's a really great read for anyone who hasn't had a chance or kind of got missed this week. It's a really great scoop about the HS2 rail project. And again, it just follows our themes around
gravy trains
and all that sort of thing. So do read it.
So we're going to go now, but thanks so much for watching. But we do recommend you subscribe and sign up, because if you do, we're going to be hanging around. You can come back in 5 minutes and join myself, Bonnie and Hardeep. Ask us anything you like, within reason. And I'll say, because it's more private. Look,
yeah, we're just packing up.
It's good.
We're packing up. So not that question. So thanks so much for watching. We'll reconstruct the set. And rescue Bonnie from the tumbling lights.
I'm used to it.
It's used to it. It's a theatre. England's a theatre.
Totally.
Byline TV is a theatre. It wasn't making strange noises before.
Yeah.
So thanks for watching. Come back in 5 minutes. If you subscribe, you can join up and ask us anything you like. If not, we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.